Welcome to today's lesson on whole numbers dividing into decimals. Today we're going to learn a few strategies that you can use to divide a whole number into a decimal. So let's go ahead and get started. We are going to begin today by using the example 4 divided by 5. Now there are a few different strategies that you can use to turn this division problem into decimal form. But we're going to start by converting 4 divided by 5 into a fraction. So I'm also going to pull up a fraction bar so that we can see as we go along how this is going to convert. So we change 4 divided by 5 into 4/5 because a fraction is another way of writing a division problem. Now our next step is to change our denominator into base 10, which means tenths, hundredths, thousandths, and so on. So what do we need to do to turn this into base 10, or a denominator of tenths? So all we had to do to get tenths was multiply our numerator and our denominator by 2. So 8/10 is an equivalent fraction for 4/5. And since our denominator is now in base 10, we can easily convert this into a decimal. Let's see what this fraction bar looks like as 8/10. Since we multiplied our numerator and our denominator by 2, we now need to split each part of our fraction into 2 equal parts. And that's going to give us 10 parts in all with 8 shaded in. In order to write 8/10 in decimal form, you need to underline the place value that's represented as your denominator. So I underlined my tenths place, and then you put your numerator in that place value. So 8/10 written as a decimal is the same as 8/10 written as a fraction. 4 divided by 5 is equal to 8/10. Another strategy that you can use to divide whole numbers into decimals is using long division. Let's go ahead and try one together. Let's practice our long division by dividing 27 by 6. Our first step is to see how many times we can fit the number 6 into the first digit of our dividend. Since 6 is greater than 2, we can fit 6 into 2 0 times. We have to move to our next place value, so we have to make sure that we place a 0 above our 2 as a placeholder. 6 can fit into 27 4 whole times. 6 times 4 equals 24. And when we subtract down, that gives us a remainder of 3. But wait, we don't want a remainder. We're trying to find a decimal value. So we don't have any more place values to bring down. So we need to add our decimal and put a 0 in the tenths place. But wait, why do we add a decimal? Well, we add the decimal to show that we're now moving into parts of a whole. Our 0's in the tenths place, and we also place our decimal in our quotient as well to show we're also moving into the tenths place. So let's bring down our 0. 6 can go into 30 5 whole times. 6 times 5 equals 30, and when we subtract out, that equals 0. 27 divided by 6 equals 4 5/10. Natalia bought 6 pounds of candy to divide equally among 5 friends. How much candy does each friend receive? Let's practice using mixed numbers for this problem. We're going to start by dividing 6 divided by 5. Now we can go ahead and turn this into a fraction. That gives us 6/5. Now we have to notice that 6/5 is an improper fraction, and we need to change this into a mixed number. In order to write this as a mixed number, we need to subtract out 1 whole. Since our denominator is fifths, we're going to subtract out 5/5, which is equal to 1 whole, and that gives us 1/5 left over. So to write this as a mixed number, we're going to write our 1 whole that we took out, and then we're going to write our 1/5 that we had left over. So 6/5 is equal to 1 1/5. But we're still not finished yet. We need to change our denominators into base 10. So that means tenths, hundredths, or thousandths. So if we multiply 5 times 2 and 1 times 2, that equals 2/10. Now we're ready to change this into a decimal. So we have 1 and 2/10 written as a fraction. And to change this into a decimal, we're going to keep our 1 whole, put our decimal point to show part of a whole, and then we go to our tenths place and put our numerator in the tenths place. 1 and 2/10 as a fraction can be written as 1 and 2/10 as a decimal. That means that each friend is going to receive 1 and 2/10 pounds of candy. Let's try a word problem together. Sylvia has a piece of string to make friendship bracelets. The string is 21 feet long. She can make exactly 12 bracelets with the string. How much string does each bracelet need? Since we used the fraction method for the last problem, let's practice long division for this one. We know that we are going to be dividing 21 by 12. So I'm going to set up 21 as my dividend, and then we are going to place 12 as my divisor. All right, let's start with our first step. 12 can't go into the number 2 because 12 is greater than 2. So we need to put a 0 as a placeholder and move on to our next place value. 12 can go into 21 one whole time. 12 times 1 equals 12. And when we subtract down, that gives us a remainder of 9. But don't forget, we're not going to be stopping with a remainder. We are going to continue to divide into the decimal place values. So I'm going to put a decimal in my quotient as well as my dividend, and then add a 0 to my tenths place. Now, 12 can go into 90 7 times. 12 times 7 equals 84, and when I subtract down, that gives me a remainder of 6. So I still have a remainder. That means that I need to go over to the hundredths place and add a 0 in my hundredths place. 12 can go into 60 5 whole times. 12 times 5 equals 60. And when I subtract out, that gives me a remainder of 0. So that means that 21 divided by 12 equals 1 and 75 hundredths. So each bracelet will need 1 and 75 hundredths a foot of string to be created. Let's review what you've learned in today's lesson. We are going to start by dividing 11 by 4 using the fraction method. All right, we're going to start by turning this into a fraction. 11 divided by 4th is also 11 fourths. Now we still need to convert this into a mixed number. We know that 8 fourths is equal to 2 wholes, and then that leaves us with 3 fourths as our fractional amount. But we're still not done yet. Our next step is to then change this into base 10. If we multiply our numerator and our denominator by 25, that will give us 75 hundredths. And hundredths we can convert into decimal form. So that's our last step. Let's convert this into a decimal. First, we bring down our whole number, then we place our decimal, and then we put in our fraction. We have 75 hundredths as a fraction, and now we have 75 hundredths as a decimal. Our second method that we practiced today was long division. So we're going to practice by dividing 6 by 12. Our first step is to put our 6 as our dividend and 12 as our divisor. Our next step is to then see how many times 12 can go into 6. Since 12 is greater than 6, we're going to put a 0 as a placeholder and then move on to our next place value. Since we're now moving into parts of a whole, we need to make sure that we add our decimal to our dividend as well as our quotient. 12 can go into 60 5 whole times. 12 times 5 equals 60, and then when we subtract out, our remainder is 0. 6 divided by 12 is equal to 5 tenths.